As long as there have been kings, there have been royal mistresses. Some were fleeting lovers, mere companions of the bedchamber, while others wielded immense power behind the scenes, shaping politics and influencing their royal patrons. Yet only two mistresses in British history have ascended to the throne. The first, Anne Boleyn, and the second, Queen Camilla. Unlike many before her, Camilla would eventually marry her prince, transitioning from scandalous mistress to beloved consort. With patience, resilience, and determination, she endured years of public scrutiny, transforming from royal harlot to a respected figure by King Charles III's side. By the time of Queen Elizabeth II's passing, Camilla had secured her place, not just as Charles's lifelong love, but as his queen. But Camilla was not the first royal mistress in her family. Long before her, another woman held the heart of a future king, her great-grandmother, Alice Keppel. Alice was a woman of beauty, charm, and ambition, navigating the intricate world of Edwardian high society with skillful precision. Through carefully cultivated relationships and a series of influential affairs, she climbed to the pinnacle of London's elite, eventually capturing the attention and the affection of the Prince of Wales. In time, she became not only his most beloved, but also his final mistress, securing a place in history as the last great royal mistress. Join us as we uncover the life, loves, and scandals of Alice Keppel, a woman who mastered the art of influence and left behind a legacy that still echoes in the modern monarchy. Alice Frederica Keppel was born on April 29, 1868, in Woolwich, Kent, into the aristocratic Edmonstone family, which had deep Scottish royal ties dating back to the 13th century. Her father, Admiral Sir William Edmonstone, was a decorated naval officer and Conservative MP who defended the Church of Scotland's autonomy. Alice inherited his wit and pragmatism, while her mother, Mary Elizabeth Parsons, contributed an ethereal charm. Though privileged, Alice's family faced financial strain due to their large household, despite wealth from land sales and coal leases. Alice was one of 11 children born to William and Mary. She remained close to her brother Archie, who later became groom-in-waiting at court, and her sisters May and Sophie, frequently visiting them before World War II. Her childhood was split between Duntreath Castle and her father's Edinburgh townhouse. While aristocratic girls received minimal education, Alice's sharp social intelligence and irreverence set her apart. She bonded deeply with Archie, who was artistic and introspective, contrasting with her rebellious energy. She defied gender norms, designing gardens and playing cricket with estate workers. As a young woman, Alice's charm made her a fixture in elite London circles. Her father's death in 1888 left Archie as the new baronet. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales embraced an extravagant lifestyle that defined the 1890s. Edward, Prince of Wales, later Edward VII, born in 1841, was shaped by his strict upbringing under Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Drawn more to pleasure than duty, he developed an early fascination with women, engaging in his first recorded affair in 1861. Though he married Princess Alexandra of Denmark in 1863, their relationship was distant, and after their youngest son's death in 1871, their intimacy likely ceased. Seeking companionship elsewhere, Edward engaged in numerous affairs, paving the way for his relationships with women like Lily Langtry and eventually Alice Keppel. Alice thrived in this atmosphere, drawn to the powerful men of Edwardian society. The era's evolving social norms, aided by figures like Countess de Grey, expanded women's roles in public life. At one gathering, Alice met George Keppel, son of the 7th Earl of Albemarle. The Keppels, with aristocratic roots dating back to 1697, had a strong military and political legacy. George, nicknamed the Wolf, had an adventurous past in South Africa and North America before entering Sandhurst and serving in the Gordon Highlanders. He resigned his commission in 1892, a year after his marriage to Alice. Despite their aristocratic status, the Keppels' finances were more modest than Alice expected, but George's charm, devotion, and social connections made him an attractive match. Their engagement was announced in 1891, with Alice's brother Archie acting as her chaperone. Their marriage settlement included £20,000, combining Alice's inheritance and a contribution from George's aunt. Alice and George Keppel married on June 1st, 1891, at St. Paul's Church, Knightsbridge. With her father deceased, her brother Archie gave her away. Their wedding was attended by family, including George's best man, Viscount Barry. Sonia Keppel later recalled the striking contrast between George's towering frame, nearly 8 feet in his Highlander bonnet, and Alice's delicate stature. The Keppels were a prominent, well-connected family. Since 1863, a Keppel had served in the Prince of Wales's household, and their history was intertwined with both military and aristocratic traditions. Their Norfolk estate, Quiddenham Hall, served as a gathering place for family and a retreat for George, who maintained strong ties to the militia. Alice, George, and their daughters, Violet and Sonia, spent Easters there, with Violet forming a close bond with her artistic uncle Arnold, the 8th Earl. Though aristocracy was shifting, with financial elites rising in prominence, the Keppels retained their status through lineage rather than wealth. They lived modestly at 7 West Halkin Street before moving to 2 Wilton Crescent, a more prestigious address within the Prince of Wales's social circle. Alice used her charm to cultivate influence, attending elite receptions while hosting strategic yet understated gatherings. Despite her love for George, she embraced the Edwardian belief that love and passion could be separate, engaging in affairs that helped maintain their financial security. One of Alice's early lovers, banker and MP Ernest Beckett, provided financial support that eased their monetary strain. Their affair, beginning in 1893, led to speculation about the paternity of Alice's firstborn, Violet, born in 1894. The child's striking resemblance to Beckett fueled further gossip, but Alice remained focused on securing her family's position. The Keppels celebrated Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897 with grandeur, though Alice was keenly aware of the stark divide between aristocratic excess and urban poverty. Alice's social conscience was evident in small but telling acts of generosity. She once purchased a doll only to give it to a needy child, and confronted Baron Aylington over the conditions of his Hoxton slums. Though raised in a staunchly Tory household, she leaned toward liberal ideals, favoring Lord Rosebery over Lord Salisbury. Yet her primary concern remained social and financial advancement. The Duchess of Marlborough noted Alice's shrewd ability to cultivate the right friendships, a skill that would prove invaluable. Alice's first meeting with Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, likely occurred in 1898, though accounts vary. Their attraction was immediate. Alice's luminous blue-green eyes, flirtatious charm, and theatrical presence captivated the prince, whose rolling R's and guttural laugh revealed his delight. Soon she was invited for a private meeting, tactfully scheduled when George was absent. By then, Alice had joined the Marlborough house set, the prince's extravagant court known for its orchestrated affairs and indulgent weekends. Edward surrounded himself with lively women, and Alice quickly became one of his most trusted and enduring lovers. She mastered the art of courtly discretion, engaging in gossip and intrigue while maintaining an elegant balance between charm and restraint. Understanding that Edward disliked intellectual women, but expected engaging conversation, Alice became indispensable to him. Edward's visits to Alice became routine, discreetly arriving for tea before their private encounters. Due to his considerable girth, a custom-designed harness aided their intimacy. Alice, now his most beloved mistress, transitioned from the constraints of marriage into a powerful social figure, much like her predecessor, Lily Langtry. Her charm, discretion, and access to scandal, stock prices, and political insights made her indispensable at royal gatherings. Over the course of 12 years, Alice became Edward's emotional anchor, ensuring she was always available while carefully navigating court politics. She ingratiated herself with his secretaries and equerries, and maintained a delicate balance with Princess Alexandra and the Duke and Duchess of York. Alice also monitored Edward's health, urging friends like the Marquis de Sauverel to persuade him to seek medical attention. By 1898, her influence was undeniable, drawing crowds at public events and securing her place in royal circles. She and George received their first invitation to Sandringham in 1899, where Alice quickly adapted to its rigid protocols and social calendar. That same year, Alice's pregnancy sparked speculation about the child's paternity. Undeterred, she maintained an active social life. In April 1900, Edward survived an assassination attempt in Brussels and reassured Alice via telegram. The following month, she gave birth to Sonia Rosemary at 30 Portman Square, where Edward sent a lavish bouquet, fueling rumors about the child's origins. Though gossip about Edward's illegitimate offspring had long circulated, Alice focused on strengthening her social ties, securing prestigious godparents for Sonia, and deepening her connections with figures like Prince Francis of Teck and financier Sir Ernest Cassell. By this time, Alice and George's marriage had evolved into a social partnership. Their townhouse at Portman Square was efficiently run by their butler and cook, accommodating Edward's frequent, discreet visits. Though Princess Alexandra tolerated Edward's affairs, she resented Alice's growing influence, particularly at the bridge table, where Alice's wit and skill made her a favorite. Beyond social charm, Alice engaged in politics, encouraging Edward to maintain diplomacy with Kaiser Wilhelm II amid rising tensions with Germany. Queen Victoria's death in 1901 marked a turning point. As king, Edward reassured his mistresses that their relationships would continue. Speculation about another pregnancy arose, with rumors pointing to Lord Stavordale or Baron Aylington as the father, though no child was confirmed. Alice, increasingly anxious about Edward's safety after assassination attempts in Brussels and the murder of Italy's King Umberto I, remained his closest confidant. Alice advised Edward on palace management, helping modernize Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle while selecting key officials. Despite occasional social snubs from hostesses wary of Queen Alexandra's disapproval, Alice maneuvered skillfully, often securing alternative invitations. Colonel William Lepore Trench even altered estate logistics to ensure Edward's privacy during their visits. Alice thrived in high society, attending the grand receptions of Millicent, Duchess of Sutherland, and mastering the structured world of Edwardian house parties. By 1901, Alice accompanied Edward on private visits, including a stay at Kiel Hall hosted by Grand Duke Mikhail of Russia. The year ended somberly with the death of Edward's sister, Empress Frederick, exacerbated by Kaiser Wilhelm II's militaristic display at her funeral. Edward's health declined, leading to a subdued Christmas at Marlborough House rather than Sandringham. Throughout it all, Alice remained indispensable to the ailing king. Edward's finances were stabilized through knighthood sales and the backing of wealthy allies like Sir Ernest Cassell, whose investments made Alice independently wealthy. Despite Cassell's lavish gifts, Alice found excessive generosity distasteful, once insisting her daughter Sonia exchange a large wedding check for furs instead. To ensure financial security, Alice encouraged George to broker deals for Sir Thomas Lipton, despite aristocratic disdain for Lipton's grosser status. By 1919, Alice's wealth was estimated at £20,000 annually, growing substantially by her death in 1947, with her UK estate valued at £177,637. Her collection of jewelry and Fabergé pieces, many linked to Edward VII, remained locked in Drummond's bank for decades before a Sotheby's auction in 1986. Among them was a brooch featuring a coded nautical flag message rumored to reference a Whitehead torpedo, a risque gift from the king. Though no direct proof exists, many believed Edward ensured Alice's financial security. A cryptic letter to Sir Ernest Cassell referenced a financial report, and Alexandra found £10,000 in Edward's room, later returned by Cassell as interest from investments, widely speculated to have been intended for Alice. As Edward's coronation approached, Alice secured a place at Balmoral, attending the revived Gillies Ball under the guise of banker Sir Sigmund Neumann's hunting party. Her influence grew, with some speculating about a formal court role. Society was scandalized when Edward named a racehorse Ecola, Alice spelled backward. To her daughters, Edward was affectionately Kingy, indulging them in playful wagers and games. Alice eagerly anticipated the coronation, while George Keppel accepted his secondary role. Edward modernized Buckingham Palace, stripping Queen Victoria's remnants and installing electric lighting and telephones. Meanwhile, Alice navigated high society, fueling rumors of an affair with Lord Stavordale. Queen Alexandra's planned departure for Copenhagen in March 1902 promised Alice more private time with Edward, At the coronation, she received a silver medal, an exclusive tour of Windsor Castle, and a prominent seat at the first royal court under Edward and Alexandra. She remained central to his elite gatherings at estates like Penn and Gopsall, where she and her daughters took part in extravagant parties and humorous costume balls. By mid-1902, Alice grew concerned over Edward's declining health. Ignoring severe abdominal pain, he insisted on fulfilling engagements until June 23rd, when his condition became critical. Surgeon Sir Frederick Trevis warned he would die without immediate surgery. Stubbornly, Edward declared he would attend the Abbey, even if it killed him before relenting. On June 24th, Trevis performed an emergency appendicitis operation. The coronation banquet was cancelled, its lavish feast redistributed to London's poor. Alice received regular updates and was deeply distressed by their first major separation. In a rare emotional letter, Edward wrote that if he were dying, he believed Alexandra would allow Alice to be by his side, a letter she treasured. Edward recovered, and the coronation was rescheduled for August 9th, 1902. Alice meticulously prepared, ensuring her daughters had new frocks for the occasion. The event, though subdued due to many dignitaries' departures, was a personal triumph for Alice. She displayed her official invitation on her boudoir mantelpiece as a testament to her role in Edward's life. On the morning of the coronation, crowds filled the streets in celebration. Inside Westminster Abbey, Alice sat among Edward's close circle of mistresses in their own box, dubbed the King's Loose Box. The ceremony unfolded with cannon fire marking the royal departure from Buckingham Palace. Queen Alexandra, resplendent in golden Indian gauze, entered first, followed by Edward in full regalia, appearing strong to Alice's relief. The Archbishop of Canterbury, with shaky hands, placed the crown on Edward's head. Lord Rosebery later remarked that the event felt more like a family festival than a grand state occasion. That evening, high society buzzed over coronation mishaps, including the Duchess of Manchester losing her coronet and tumbling at the Chancellor's feet. With the ceremony complete, Edward resumed royal duties, including a naval review at Spithead and a Scottish cruise. Alice and George joined him at Balmoral, where Edward viewed his coronation on film. The year ended with royal visits to Sandringham and Dunrobin Castle, where Alice remained a favored companion. In December, she dined next to Edward at Gopsall, effortlessly captivating him while Lady de Grey, seated beside him for the fourth time, struggled for attention. Alice and George then traveled to Egypt, staying at Cairo's Savoy Hotel, where they encountered Winston Churchill, who described Alice as very good company. This concluded a year in which she solidified her place within Edward's inner circle. By 1903, Alice had cultivated influential allies like Lady Sarah Wilson, though Queen Alexandra barely tolerated her. Some aristocrats, including William Waldorf Astor, dismissed her as a public strumpet. But Alice wielded considerable political influence. Edward, preferring informal communication over ministerial meetings, relied on intermediaries like Alice, Lord Fisher, Sir Francis Knollys, and Sir Ernest Cassell. Her political role was evident in 1907 when she was strategically seated next to Kaiser Wilhelm II at Highcliffe Castle, likely on royal orders. Though Wilhelm disapproved of her, the Austrian ambassador noted she was placed there to extract useful information. Alice's influence extended to the 1908 Balkan crisis, when Austrian diplomats attempted to use her as a back channel to Edward. The tactic failed, and Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey reprimanded them, but officials like Sir Charles Harding later admitted Alice was a discreet and effective conduit. Though not a traditional liberal hostess, she cultivated ties with figures like H. Asquith and David Lloyd George, subtly shaping Edward's views while avoiding public acknowledgement of her role. Ministers adapted to the king's preference for informal discussions, with Alice facilitating candid exchanges behind the scenes. By 1903, Alice secured a long-term lease for 30 Portman Square, ensuring a stable residence. While Edward traveled extensively, she never joined him in Marienbad, where Prussian and Austrian dignitaries closely monitored his actions, but Biarritz became their private retreat. Each spring, Edward spent 2 months there, free from Alexandra's scrutiny, with Alice effectively acting as his consort. Meanwhile, her daughter Violet's growing romance with Vita Sackville-West, which would later scandalize Alice, began at school in 1904. In 1909, Edward visited Alice's childhood home, Duntreath, where she sensed his deep anxiety over Europe's escalating tensions. His Berlin visit that year confirmed his declining health as he publicly coughed through speeches and collapsed at a luncheon. By 1910, with Germany pressuring Russia and Britain facing political turmoil over the people's budget, Edward grew increasingly distressed. Ever superstitious, he ominously declared on New Year's Eve, "We shall have some very bad luck this year." Alice and George joined Edward at Elvedon Hall in January before heading to Brighton with Arthur Sassoon. The king, fearing a constitutional crisis, appeared visibly weakened. On February 26, after an official dinner at Buckingham Palace, he finally agreed to leave for Biarritz on March 7th, much to Queen Alexandra's fury, as Alice would be his sole companion. Edward's journey proved taxing. A chill caught in Paris developed into bronchitis, and though Alice and Sir James Reed monitored him, he refused to rest. Poor weather confined him indoors, forcing Alice to accompany him on long walks through the Hôtel du Palais. Meanwhile, Queen Alexandra, cruising the Mediterranean, repeatedly telegraphed him to leave horrid Biarritz and return home. On the eve of his departure, Edward stood on his veranda, gazed at the Atlantic and sighed, "I shall be sorry to leave Biarritz." Perhaps for good. Returning to London on April 27th, Edward refused to slow down despite worsening health. A brief stay at Sandringham exacerbated his bronchial condition. On May 3rd, Alice dined with him at Buckingham Palace, but he was too exhausted to play bridge. The next day, doctors diagnosed severe bronchitis, and by May 5th, his grave condition was publicly announced. Queen Alexandra was urgently recalled to London. On May 6th, Edward insisted on working but fainted twice before slipping into a coma. As he neared death, Alexandra allowed his closest friends to bid farewell. Alice long claimed Queen Alexandra had summoned her to Edward's deathbed, but in reality, she pleaded for entry, citing a 1902 letter from the king. Alexandra reluctantly agreed, and when Alice arrived, Edward was already unconscious. The queen briefly acknowledged her, remarking, "I am sure you always had a good influence over him." Overcome with grief, Alice collapsed, sobbing and wondering aloud what was to become of her. At 11:45 p.m. on May 6, 1910, Edward VII passed away. Alice fled 30 Portman Square, seeking refuge with the Arthur James family. Though independently wealthy, rumors swirled that she was escaping creditors. Her grief was profound. Withdrawn from her children, she sank into depression. When she attempted to sign the condolence book at Marlborough House, King George V and Queen Mary explicitly forbade it. Alexandra rejected her request to adopt Edward's dog Caesar, calling him "that horrid dog." Even Kaiser Wilhelm II refused her an audience. Initially barred from Edward's funeral, royal advisors, fearing scandal, allowed her a private moment at his coffin after Westminster Hall had closed to the public. Determined to reinvent herself, Alice left for Ceylon in November 1910 with Violet and Sonia, quipping, "No young lady's education is complete without a smattering of Tamil." She traveled through Italy, Algiers, and the Red Sea before arriving in Colombo, where she stayed at the Galley Face Hotel and visited Sir Thomas Lipton's tea plantation. In China, she collected objets d'art before returning to London, ready to reclaim her social standing. By 1911, Alice strategically rebuilt her position, joining elite circles with the Asquiths, Balfours, and Churchills. Meanwhile, her daughter studied in Munich and the Slade School of Art, though Alice worried Violet was becoming too German. When George brought them home a year later, Sonia was startled to find Alice's hair had turned completely white from grief. The Keppels resumed their glamorous travels through France, Spain, and Switzerland. In St. Moritz, Alice joined friends for bobsleighing, sustaining a minor scar in a sleigh accident. Leaving 30 Portman Square behind, she secured 16 Grosvenor Street, a grand Mayfair townhouse where she hosted high-profile gatherings. Through her friendship with the Duke of Westminster, she secured a 63-year lease for £500 per annum. the house became an opulent social hub, filled with Chinese objets d'art and royal gifts rumored to be from Edward VII. In June 1913, Alice hosted Violet's extravagant coming-out ball, though Sonia found the spectacle overwhelming and fled to a friend's home. Violet developed a reputation as a flirt, but gravitated toward intellectuals like Viscount Haldane and Bloomsbury writer George Edward Moore. Alice maintained ties with Ernest Beckett, widely rumored to be Violet's real father, and the Keppels vacationed at his villa in Ravello. That same year, Violet rekindled her friendship with Vita Sackville West, whom she had met at school. Violet, distressed by Vita's engagement to Harold Nicholson, faked an engagement to Lord Gerald Wellesley, who quickly married another. Vita married Harold in 1913, and their son Ben was born the year after. Violet entertained flirtations with men, including poet Julian Grenfell. When Alice caught them together in a walk-in cupboard at Grosvenor Street, she was furious, and Julian's mother intervened to smooth things over. Their relationship ended when Grenfell was killed at Ypres in 1915. During this period, the Keppels grew close to the eccentric Sitwell siblings, Edith, Osbert, and Sacheverell. Violet falsely claimed an engagement to Osbert, who was unaware of it until Alice announced it to the family. Though the engagement never materialized, Violet and Osbert remained lifelong friends. Alice's relationship with Edith Sitwell was more complex. While Edith admired Alice's generosity, she resented her social critiques. When Alice suggested poetry was no substitute for marriage, Edith retorted that she preferred poetry to human love, a pointed jab at Alice's past. Despite the fading Edwardian era, Alice remained a force in London society, keeping Grosvenor Street a hub of influence. At Mrs. Arthur Sassoon's 1913 ball, Alice was bombarded with gossip about suitors for Violet. She maintained her standing by frequenting Duntreath and indulging in horse racing, a passion she had shared with Edward VII. That autumn, she met Clementine Churchill at Ayr, where her betting tips proved unlucky. In Paris, Alice shocked Clementine by suggesting she take a powerful lover to advance Winston's career. As Europe edged toward war, the Keppels continued their extravagant travels. In 1913 and July 1914, they stayed at Clingendahl House in the Netherlands, hosting gatherings with their daughters' suitors, many of whom would soon die in battle. Among their guests was Elizabeth Asquith, whose mother, Margot Asquith, called Alice a woman of historical interest. On August 4, 1914, as Britain declared war on Germany, the Keppels hurried home. Initially, the war seemed distant to Britain's elite, but it soon became personal. George Keppel enlisted in the Royal Fusiliers and later commanded Highland regiments in Ireland, likely saving him from near-certain death at Pozieres in 1916. The Keppels suffered losses. William Edmonstone fell at the Somme in 1916, and Arnold Keppel in 1917. Alice, determined to contribute, turned to Lady Sarah Wilson and worked at No. 7 Red Cross Hospital in Boulogne, later relocated to Étaples. Though she focused on clerical duties rather than medical training, her frequent trips to France worried her nephew, Archie Edmonstone, who sought Winston Churchill's advice on whether she should return. Churchill reassured him, "I think the risk may be accepted." War loosened aristocratic constraints, granting Violet and Sonia newfound independence. While Sonia resumed her studies, Violet engaged in charity work, amusingly mistaking knife cleaning powder for cocoa while serving a general. Meanwhile, Alice remained in London, balancing social life and household precautions against Zeppelin raids. Her home continued hosting key political figures, including Prime Minister Asquith and Winston Churchill, though Queen Mary disapproved of Alice's lavish wartime luncheons. As the coalition government formed in 1915, Alice learned Churchill would be ousted due to the Gallipoli disaster. In a gesture of goodwill, she offered Clementine Churchill a designer gown, which was declined. Sonia joined the war effort, assisting with land labor and volunteering at a soldier's canteen. As the war dragged on, George Keppel, aged by stress, withdrew from society. Christmas 1915 at Cracoll was somber, marked by the wounding of Gerard Sturt. By 1916, conscription deepened tensions, and Alice's brother-in-law, Major General Henry Pepin, oversaw the execution of Sir Roger Casement after the Easter Rising. Alice's declining health prompted a retreat to Sir Ernest Cassell's estate in Bournemouth. Clementine Churchill later recalled Alice persistently offering Winston political advice on seaside walks, much to her exhaustion. As Zeppelin raids intensified, Alice remained composed, though Violet sought refuge at Knowle with the Sackville Wests. In May 1916, Sonia's 16th birthday party was interrupted by news of the Battle of Jutland, after which Alice solemnly ordered the national anthem played before dismissing guests. She later retreated to Watlington Park, hosting diplomats and aristocrats, including the Sitwells and Nicholsons. While stationed in Ireland, George's regiment received news of their nephew, William Edmonstone's death in September 1916, a devastating blow to the family. Meanwhile, Sonia, staying at Rosyth Naval Base with her cousin, Admiral Sir Frederick Hamilton, witnessed the aftermath of Jutland. Stranded at Dunfermline Station, she hitched a ride on a farm cart and quickly charmed the naval officers. However, when a porter, Johnny MacPhail, proposed marriage, Alice intercepted and destroyed the letter, telling Sonia, "You don't really want to be a porter's wife." Food shortages worsened, but Alice ensured provisions were shared among staff and family. In December 1916, Prime Minister Asquith resigned, and his family briefly moved into Grosvenor Street, making Alice's home a political hub. In 1917, their nephew Edward Keppel was killed at Ypres. As war continued, King George V severed German ties, renaming the royal house from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor. Alice, deeply patriotic but nostalgic for Edward VII, saw it as another severed link to his legacy. In 1918, Alice arranged Sonia's long-overdue social debut, despite Margot Asquith's disapproval. Lady Kinloch and Viscounts Harcourt chaperoned her, ensuring a successful introduction to society. Meanwhile, George remained in Ireland, training Highland troops amid rising Sinn Féin resistance, earning campaign medals for his service. Alice, too, was honored with the 1914 Star, British War Medal, and Victory Medal, worn defiantly on a bar instead of a bow. Sonia took on war work as a parlor maid at a Russian officers' hospital, while Violet rebelled against discipline, flirting with Cyril Asquith and scandalizing society. On November 11, 1918, as Britain celebrated the armistice, Alice joined the jubilant crowds at Buckingham Palace, though she privately mourned the end of an era, her influence fading with Edwardian high society. Determined to secure a respectable marriage for Sonia, Alice struggled with Violet's reckless behavior. Many disapproved of Violet's wild nature, with Sybil Colfax calling her a really wicked creature. Drawn to France's bohemian circles, Violet remained fixated on Vita Sackville West, their relationship deepening into an obsessive bond despite Vita's 1913 marriage. Alarmed by gossip, Alice sought to separate Violet from Vita by forcing her into marriage. She selected Major Dennis Trefusis as a suitable husband, but Violet refused him in October 1918. In retaliation, Alice dragged her to country retreats and publicly exposed Lady Sackville's affair. On March 26, 1919, Alice unilaterally announced Violet's engagement, and despite her resistance, orchestrated an extravagant wedding at St. George's, Hanover Square on June 16th. The marriage was doomed from the start. Vita stalked the couple throughout their Paris honeymoon, prompting Violet to remove her wedding ring. She eventually spent the night with Vita, devastating Dennis. Even as the Treaty of Versailles was signed, Violet continued sending frantic telegrams to Vita, unwilling to accept her new role as a wife. As Violet and Vita continued their meetings, Alice issued a final ultimatum. If Violet did not break off the affair, Sonia's marriage prospects would be ruined. Though Violet briefly relented, by October 1919, she and Vita fled to Monte Carlo, openly living as a couple for 2 months. When Vita returned to Harold, Violet spiraled into despair, plotting another escape in early 1920. Realizing she had lost Violet, Alice turned her attention to securing a prestigious match for Sonia. She presented her at court in 1919 and introduced her to Europe's exiled aristocracy at Ascot. By 1920, Sonia was engaged to Roland Cubitt, heir to the Baron Ashcombe title. Though initially skeptical, Alice ensured a lucrative settlement, remarking, neither you nor I can legislate for eternity." Meanwhile, Violet remained obsessed with Vida. In February 1920, they attempted another elopement, prompting Alice to involve Scotland Yard. George Keppel intercepted them in Amiens, but Violet refused to return. Eventually, Dennis Trefusis and Harold Nicholson forcibly separated them. Alice offered Violet £600 annually to play the role of a proper wife, but she resisted, leading Alice to ban her from 16 Grosvenor Street, effectively making her a social outcast. As Violet's despair deepened, Dennis considered divorce. Fearing scandal, Alice paid for them to live abroad, but refused reconciliation despite pleas from family friends. She dreaded Violet becoming another Radcliffe Hall, whose lesbian novel The Well of Loneliness shocked society. Violet found refuge in Paris, where she immersed herself in intellectual circles under Winneretta's singer, Princesse de Polignac. Meanwhile, Dennis pursued affairs, including one with a Chanel model, while Violet remained fixated on Vita. By 1923, Violet and Dennis settled in Auteuil, where she hosted literary salons attended by the Sitwells and Rebecca West. That Christmas, Alice and George joined them on a Nile cruise with the Princesse de Polignac, as Europe's elite fixated on Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Violet fell in love with a medieval tower in Saint-Lô-de-Nau, which Alice indulgently purchased for her. By 1929, Dennis, suffering from tuberculosis, died at the American hospital in Neuilly, spared the need for divorce. Society barely noticed Violet's absence in his final months. Despite Violet's scandals, Alice remained a powerful political figure, maintaining connections with Winston Churchill and David Lloyd George. She used her salons as informal diplomatic hubs and, in 1922, praised Sir Horace Rumbold's handling of the Chanak crisis, demonstrating her continued influence in foreign affairs. By the 1920s, Alice and George Keppel spent more time abroad, eventually settling in Florence. In 1925, she purchased Villa dell'Ombrellino on Bellosguardo Hill, using money left by financier Ernest Cassell. Transforming it into a hub of European high society, she hosted Churchill, European royals, and intellectuals, earning her the title Queen of Florence. George, meanwhile, maintained an independent life in the villa's colonel's wing, charming young women and dismissing Oscar Wilde as a frightful bounder. Locals affectionately called him Il Vecchio Cornuto, the old cuckold, and a mistaken tour guide once claimed he had been Queen Victoria's last lover, adding to dinner party gossip. When Edward VIII abdicated in 1936, Alice, now seen as formidable and slightly coarse, remarked, "Things were done better in my day." Old anecdotes about her and Edward VII resurfaced, while Violet embellished her own past, even claiming fictional affairs with Mussolini. As Mussolini's regime tightened control, the Keppels remained indifferent, continuing their lavish lifestyle. Hitler's 1938 visit to Florence barely interrupted their baccarat nights. However, when Italy joined World War II in 1940, they fled via Monte Carlo and Dax, eventually boarding a Royal Navy troopship in Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Alice's dramatic return to England was likened to a disturbed blancmange. Back in London, Alice resided at the Ritz among European exiles, including King Zog of Albania. Despite rationing, she maintained high standards, seeking out better food in local pubs. However, signs of decline emerged. James Lees Milne described her as a ghostly figure, cigarette in hand, while Chips Channon noted her growing confusion, blending memories from both world wars. Though aging, Alice's wit remained sharp. When a bishop mentioned his love for Trollope, she gleefully repeated it, enjoying its unintended double meaning. By 1945, Alice planned her return to Florence, relieved to find Villa dell'Ombrellino largely untouched. She spent Christmas at the Ritz and made her final trip to France in 1946, dining with British Ambassador Duff Cooper. Diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, she dismissed concerns, quipping, "80 is dull, 90 is chic, so I shall start counting from 90. On September 11, 1947, Alice Keppel died at 79. A heartbroken George fell ill and died weeks later on November 22nd. They were buried together in Florence's Protestant cemetery, marking the end of an era. Alice's estate, managed through Ernest Cassell's investments, provided generously for both daughters. Violet inherited Ombrellino, but clashed with Sonia, who insisted on selling Alice's furnishings, forcing Violet to refurnish the villa herself. Their relationship cooled, and Violet distanced herself from the Keppels. Violet split her time between Florence, La Tour de Saint-Lô, and Paris, indulging in a literary lifestyle. She died in 1972, aged 77, requesting her heart be placed in a casket at Saint-Lô, though this was only partially fulfilled. Sonia, who had divorced Roland Cubitt before he became the third Baron Ashcombe in 1947, continued Alice's legacy as a renowned hostess at Hall Place in Hampshire until her death in 1986. It is through Sonia that Alice became the great-grandmother of Queen Camilla. Alice Keppel embodied the final chapter of an era when royal mistresses held quiet but considerable power. Unlike the courtesans of previous centuries, she sought no grand titles, yet her influence on Edward VII's reign was undeniable. She tempered his volatile nature, served as a discreet political conduit, and navigated court life with charm and intelligence. In doing so, she secured her place in history, not just as the king's most beloved companion, but as the last great royal mistress. So what do you think of Alice Keppel's extraordinary life? Was she simply a mistress, or did she wield more power than history often credits her for? And how does her story shape the way we view Queen Camilla's journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, keep seeking the stories that move your soul.